Welcome, and thank you for attending the literature review of Jack Welch, who was a very influential and significant leader of GE during the 90s and early 2000s. He's a prime example of a great leader, specifically in the beginning of his leadership with GE. We are the team Business as Usual, and we are made up of Preetpal, Karanjot, Michael, and MJ Reid. To start things up, we're going to go over a bit of brief introduction on why we chose Jack Welch as an example, followed by his leadership styles and traits, and then how his actions supported his company's vision, strategies, and values. And finally, we'll finish off by his influence on company's organizational culture and a conclusion. Jack Welch played a key role in the world's 7th most valuable company, according to Forbes, which was General Electric. During his tenure as CEO, he increased General Electric's stock value by 4,000% between 1981 and 2001, making the most valuable corporation at the time. Jack was known for his brutal honesty and created an environment where people working under GE had to work like they wanted to be there. He transformed GE into the world's most competitive enterprise by rewarding effective employees and opening positions for better ones. His focus was on hiring people who were inspired by working for the company and were able to contribute in making the company better. So he really embraced people who shared his vision. He embraced and encouraged change to expose opportunities and to take advantage of them. This was done by his change-oriented perspective and leadership qualities that inspired employees to be passionate about their jobs. Jack Welch is a prime example of a leader who maintains stability and encourages company growth over time with a change-focused mindset. And this really puts him, at least in the beginning of his tenure at GE, in the place of a transformative leader. So, in the beginning of his tenure, he was definitely on the rise. He was a new CEO. He wanted to change the company. He completely reoriented the corporate structure from a very broad bureaucracy with a lot of middle managers who didn't seem to do much, according to Jack, to something very lean, very efficient. And this was important because when he came into his CEO position, he was in the middle of a recession and he needed to make GE more lean. During his first year, he laid off 80,000 employees and 45,000 more over the next 2 years. And who he targeted were the employees who weren't susceptible to his vision, the ones who didn't really embrace the ideals that he was selling. So he kept the people who were important in moving GE in the direction he wanted to move it. He was a visionary in that way. On the other end of the spectrum, he was extremely efficient. He was impersonal and he saw employees as workers and nothing else. So, as you can imagine, a lot of the employees who had been there for more than 25 years were more rigid. They were settled into their roles and they maybe embraced change less. GE rules stated that you couldn't lay off someone who'd been there for that long because of a lack of work. So all he did was change that rule to say, as necessary. And nobody argued with him. It was a very charismatic, very almost sneaky maneuver that didn't make anyone mad and let him do what he needed to do. So that was a really good example of Jack Welch's leadership. Moving on to the end of his career, Jack's leadership really started to falter and fail the company. Early in the 21st century, the internet bubble burst. And GE, like almost any major corporation, suffered as a result. And Jack wasn't really able to handle that. He didn't handle it well. He was used to success his entire career. He developed these really defensive leadership tactics. Employees would talk about him just going off in a rage. Just started shouting for the smallest thing, using fear tactics. He'd start demanding outrageous business results, like a 50% increase over the previous year in profitability, and this forced employees to cook the books, which brought GE into ethical issues. On top of this, he demanded more and more conversation as his ego inflated and inflated, and it just wasn't sustainable. He absolutely refused to change despite poor company results. And unfortunately, this was the end of his career. At one point he had to surrender a lot of his compensation because it was found to be illegal in the courts. It just wasn't doable, wasn't acceptable. So moving on with the presentation, we're going to ignore his downslide. We touched on it, but we're going to point out the things he did during the 80s and 90s that really brought the company to its full potential. So as we know, everything a leader does affects an organization, because everybody in that organization looks to the leader for leadership. So Jack was great when he came into GE because he found these outside ideas, brought in new philosophies, new efficiencies, a leanness to the company, and really listened to his instincts. And this is what really brought the company into the 21st century. This is what brought it into its next decade, or almost revolution, you could say, because of the massive spike in stock price. He was able to use his instincts and the way he felt and his visions to define the short and long-term goals that the company should stick to, and they did. He removed maybes from their business plan, which was important. He gave them hard lines to follow, and the company stuck to it. They pulled through. And he was exceedingly honest. Honesty was one of his major virtues, and he stuck to it. Whether he was offensive, rude, or just downright ruthless, he was honest, and nobody in that company could fault him for that. Many of his behaviors did make him successful, especially during the start of his career. For example, his attitude towards supportive and fair-minded leadership. Before he had his backslide where he was demanding more and more and more, he really saw both sides of the arguments in business and was able to make fair, responsible decisions based on that. He really valued new ideas. He created mutual respect between his employees, particularly the leaders that he was developing. And he had a good respect for employees' well-being while they were working with the company, I should specify. He also valued communication and teamwork, which is really important. He was a good team builder. He knew how to help people form the groups they needed to get jobs done and get them done well. Jack Welch did a total 180 on the company's culture. Instead of dealing with multiple levels of management, communication was direct, fast, candid, and honest. Once again, that was Jack Welch's biggest qualities. He was honest as the day is long. Everybody in the company could rely on him to tell them what's what. He developed employees at every level, and this development really became a priority. It became part of the company's policy. He invested in the people who invested their time in the company, and this just made the company stronger. And once again, he stripped down the organization. He cut out the middle managers, he stripped down the bureaucracy, and he made a lean, mean business machine. That was really his gift to GE, was stripping it down to its bare bones. So he realized that employees should be energized and motivated by change. This is part of his transformative leadership. He really clung to those employees who believed in the vision that he had for GE, who were really willing to give themselves and their ideas and their motivations and energy into changing GE into what he thought it should be. And that's ultimately what caused the company to change, was that faith that he gave employees, that involvement, that passion that he threw into it. It's what got all the gears moving in the right directions. He also caused a lot of customer involvement. He asked GE's customers what they wanted and how they wanted to see the organization evolved, and he respected that. It was key to the changes he made, and obviously with the 4,000% improvement, he did his job and he did it well. Customer involvement was key. General Electric looked for 5 key things, more or less, when they were looking for leadership development. They were looking for an external focus, a lot of imagination, expertise, whether it was in engineering, business, development, business sales, whatever department you were in, they were looking for expertise, clear thinking, and inclusiveness. And I think it's really important to highlight inclusiveness here. It's something that's been highlighted in Canadian business in particular over the last decade, I would say, in particular with their inclusiveness of LGBT people and Native American people. And I know from personal experience that this has been beneficial in creating an accepting and open workplace with new ideas. And it created all these factors from those. They pulled leaders which had all of these different factors, which was continuous learning, self-sufficiency, free thinking, open communication, innovation, and boundless learning. And that's really what came in and created the leadership culture at GE. And Jack had a big part in that. He designed this program. So to wrap it up, Jack Welch has experienced great leadership followed by a damaging downfall to that infamous state that coincided with the leadership crisis of the United States from 2000 to 2010. Notably, Enron was part of that. Before he had his big crash, his instincts were wonderful. He was able to predict exactly what GE needed. He stripped things down when he needed to, and his honesty is what justified it all for him. I think the most important lessons we can learn from Jack is that transformative leadership works. We've seen it work time and time again. And in the case of GE, it worked until the transformative leadership stopped. When Jack had his backslide and became a grumpy manager, is essentially what he was, with an inflated ego, that's when things fell apart. He lost his vision, he lost his principles, and everything was fine before then. So the lesson we take away from that is your principles are important. They're the basis of your leadership. So maintain your values. Know what your leadership traits are. Strive for change and overcome the selfishness that comes with an inflated ego from being a successful leader. So thank you very much for listening to our presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to message any of our team members. Our email addresses are all on Nate's Moodle site, and you can message us in any of the forums. Thank you for your time.